The Innocents Abroad by Mark Twain. Chapter 6. I think the Azores must be very little known in America. Out of our whole ship's company, there was not a solitary individual who knew anything whatever about them. Some of the party, well-read concerning most other lands, had no other information about the Azores than that they were a group of 9 or 10 small islands far out in the Atlantic, something more than halfway between New York and Gibraltar. That was all. These considerations moved me to put in a paragraph of dry facts just here. The community is eminently Portuguese. That is to say, it is slow, poor, shiftless, sleepy, and lazy. There is a civil governor, appointed by the King of Portugal, and also a military governor who can assume supreme control and suspend the civil government at his pleasure. The islands contain a population of about 200,000, almost entirely Portuguese. Everything is staid and settled, for the country was 100 years old when Columbus discovered America. The principal crop is corn, and they raise it and grind it just as their great-great-great-grandfathers did. They plow with a board slightly shod with iron. Their trifling little harrows are drawn by men and women. Small windmills grind the corn 10 bushels a day, and there is one assistant superintendent to feed the mill and a general superintendent to stand by and keep him from going to sleep. When the wind changes, they hitch on some donkeys and actually turn the whole upper half of the mill around until the sails are in proper position, instead of fixing the concerns so that the sails could be moved instead of the mill. Oxen tread the wheat from the ear after the fashion prevalent in the time of Methuselah. There is not a wheelbarrow in the land. They carry everything on their heads or on donkeys or in a wicker-bodied cart, whose wheels are solid blocks of wood and whose axles turn with the wheel. There is not a modern plow in the islands or a threshing machine. All attempts to introduce them have failed. The good Catholic Portuguese crossed himself and prayed God to shield him from all blasphemous desire to know more than his father did before him. The climate is mild, they never have snow or ice, and I saw no chimneys in the town. The donkeys and the men, women, and children of a family all eat and sleep in the same room, and are unclean, are ravaged by vermin, and are truly happy. The people lie and cheat the stranger and are desperately ignorant and have hardly any reverence for their dead. The latter trait shows how little better they are than the donkeys they eat and sleep with. The only well-dressed Portuguese in the camp are the half a dozen well-to-do families, the Jesuit priests, and the soldiers of the little garrison. The wages of a laborer are 20 to 24 cents a day, and those of a good mechanic about twice as much. They count it and raise at 1,000 to the dollar, and this makes them rich and contented. Fine grapes used to grow in the islands, and an excellent wine was made and exported. But a disease killed all the vines 15 years ago, and since that time no wine has been made. The islands being wholly of volcanic origin, the soil is necessarily very rich. Nearly every foot of ground is under cultivation, and 2 or 3 crops a year of each article are produced. But nothing is exported save a few oranges, chiefly to England. Nobody comes here and nobody goes away. News is a thing unknown in Fayal. A thirst for it is a passion equally unknown. A Portuguese of average intelligence inquired if our Civil War was over, because, he said, somebody had told him it was, or at least it ran in his mind that somebody had told him something like that. And when a passenger gave an officer of the garrison copies of the Tribune, the Herald, and Times, he was surprised to find later news in them from Lisbon than he had just received by the little monthly steamer. He was told that it came by cable. He said he knew they had tried to lay a cable 10 years ago, but it had been in his mind somehow that they hadn't succeeded. It is in communities like this that Jesuit humbuggery flourishes. We visited a Jesuit cathedral nearly 200 years old and found in it a piece of the veritable cross upon which our Savior was crucified. It was polished and hard and in as excellent a state of preservation as if the dead tragedy on Calvary had occurred yesterday instead of 18 centuries ago. But these confiding people believe in that piece of wood unhesitatingly. In a chapel of the cathedral is an altar with facings of solid silver. At least they call it so, and I think myself it would go a couple of hundred to the ton, to speak after the fashion of the silver miners, and before it is kept forever burning a small lamp. A devout lady who died left money and contracted for unlimited masses for the repose of her soul, and also stipulated that this lamp should be kept lighted always, day and night. She did all this before she died, you understand. It is a very small lamp and a very dim one, and it could not work her much damage, I think, if it went out altogether. The great altar of the cathedral, and also 3 or 4 minor ones, are a perfect mass of gilt gimcracks and gingerbread. And they have a swarm of rusty, dusty, battered apostles standing around the filigree work, some on one leg, and some with one eye out, but a gamey look in the other, and some with 2 or 3 fingers gone, and some with not enough nose left to blow, all of them crippled and discouraged, and fitter subjects for the hospital than the cathedral. The walls of the chancel are porcelain, all pictured over with figures of almost life-size, very elegantly wrought and dressed in the fanciful costumes of 2 centuries ago. The design was a history of something or somebody, but none of us were learned enough to read the story. The old father, reposing under a stone close by, dated 1686, might have told us if he could have risen, but he didn't. As we came down through the town, we encountered a squad of little donkeys ready saddled for use. The saddles were peculiar, to say the least. They consisted of a sort of sawbuck with a small mattress on it, and this furniture covered about half the donkey. There were no stirrups, but really such supports were not needed. To use such a saddle was the next thing to riding a dinner table. There was ample support clear out to one's knee joints. A pack of ragged Portuguese muleteers crowded around us, offering their beasts $50 an hour. More rascality to the stranger, for the market price is 16 cents. Half a dozen of us mounted the ungainly affairs and submitted to the indignity of making a ridiculous spectacle of ourselves through the principal streets of a town of 10,000 inhabitants. We started. It was not a trot, a gallop, or a canter, but a stampede, and made up of all possible or conceivable gaits. No spurs were necessary. There was a muleteer to every donkey and a dozen volunteers beside, and they banged the donkeys with their goad sticks and pricked them with their spikes and shouted something that sounded like "Sekia," and kept up a din and a racket that was worse than bedlam itself. These rascals were all on foot, but no matter, they were always up to time. They can outrun and outlast a donkey. Altogether, ours was a lively and a picturesque procession, and drew crowded audiences to the balconies wherever we went. Blucher could do nothing at all with his donkey. The beast scampered zigzag across the road, and the others ran into him. He scraped Blucher against carts and the corners of houses. The road was fenced in with high stone walls, and the donkey gave him a polishing first on one side and then on the other, but never once took the middle. He finally came to the house he was born in and darted into the parlor, scraping Blucher off at the doorway. After remounting, Blucher said to the muleteer, Now, that's enough, you go slow hereafter. But the fellow knew no English and did not understand, so he simply said, Sekiya, and the donkey was off again like a shot. He turned the corner suddenly, and Blucher went over his head. And, to speak truly, every mule stumbled over the two, and the whole cavalcade was piled up in a heap. No harm done. A fall from one of those donkeys is of little more consequence than rolling off a sofa. The donkeys all stood still after the catastrophe and waited for their dismembered saddles to be patched up and put on by the noisy muleteers. Blucher was pretty angry and wanted to swear, but every time he opened his mouth, his animal did so also and let off a series of brays that drowned all other sounds. It was fun scurrying around the breezy hills and through the beautiful canyons. There was that rare thing, novelty, about it. It was a fresh, new, exhilarating sensation, this donkey riding, and worth 100 worn and threadbare home pleasures. The roads were a wonder, and well they might be. Here was an island with only a handful of people in it, 25,000, and yet such fine roads do not exist in the United States outside of Central Park. Everywhere you go in any direction you find either a hard, smooth, level thoroughfare, just sprinkled with block lava sand, and bordered with little gutters neatly paved with small, smooth pebbles, or compactly paved ones like Broadway. They talk much of the rust pavement in New York and call it a new invention. Yet here they have been using it in this remote little isle of the sea for 200 years. Every street in Horta is handsomely paved with the heavy rust blocks, and the surface is neat and true as a floor, not marred by holes like Broadway. And every road is fenced in by tall, solid lava walls, which will last 1,000 years in this land where frost is unknown. They are very thick and are often plastered and whitewashed and capped with projecting slabs of cut stone. Trees from gardens above hang their swaying tendrils down and contrast their bright green with the whitewash of the black lava of the walls and make them beautiful. The trees and vines stretch across these narrow roadways sometimes and so shut out the sun that you seem to be riding through a tunnel. The pavements, the roads, and the bridges are all government work. The bridges are of a single span, a single arch of cut stone without a support and paved on top with flags of lava and ornamental pebble work. Everywhere are walls, 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 and all of them tasteful and handsome, and eternally substantial. And everywhere are those marvelous pavements, so neat, so smooth, and so indestructible. And if ever roads and streets and the outsides of houses were perfectly free from any sign or semblance of dirt or dust or mud or uncleanliness of any kind, it is Horta, it is Fayal. The lower classes of the people and their persons and their domiciles are not clean, but there it stops. The town and the island are miracles of cleanliness. We arrived home again finally after a 10-mile excursion, and the irrepressible muleteers scampered at our heels through the main street, goading the donkeys, shouting the everlasting Sekiya, and singing John Brown's Body in ruinous English. When we were dismounted and it came to settling, the shouting and jawing and swearing and quarreling among the muleteers and with us was nearly deafening. One fellow would demand $1 an hour for the use of his donkey. Another claimed half $1 for picking him up, another $0.25 for helping in that service, and about 14 guides presented bills for showing us the way through the town and its environs, and every vagrant of them was more vociferous and more vehement and more frantic in gesture than his neighbor. We paid one guide and paid for one muleteer to each donkey. The mountains on some of the islands are very high. We sailed along the shore of the island of Pico under a stately green pyramid that rose up with one unbroken sweep from our bare feet to an altitude of 7,613 feet, and thrust its summit above the white clouds like an island adrift in a fog. We got plenty of fresh oranges, lemons, figs, apricots, etc. in these Azores, of course. But I will desist. I'm not here to write patent office reports. We are on our way to Gibraltar, and shall reach there 5 or 6 days out from the Azores. End of chapter 6.